Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Kris Sims, BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Her website, taxpayer.com. Welcome back to the show, Kris.
Thanks for having us.
Kris, yourself hit hard by the floods that have hit the Fraser Valley of BC and so many other communities, and no end in sight to these monstrous rainstorms that they now call atmospheric rivers. Before we used to call them pineapple expresses because they originate from around the southern tropics near Hawaii. The latest one, though, I've looked at the satellite map, it's coming from the Philippines.
Yes.
So don't just blame Hawaii.
No, exactly. Basically, it's a big rainstorm coming in off of warm waters in the Pacific. And, you know, like, as a former reporter and still a journalist, we were taught very clearly, don't use jargon. Even if it's well-intentioned jargon, I'm not making a judgment call on it. But if it's meteorological jargon, military jargon, all that stuff, just speak plainly, because otherwise people don't understand what you're talking about. So these atmospheric rivers are big rainstorms. They could be devastatingly big rainstorms. Go ahead and modify it that way. But what's happening right now in the eastern Fraser Valley, the Hope area, is really something else. As most of the listeners in BC will know, but most in the rest of Canada probably don't, all four of our major highways in the southern part of the province are squeezed through the little tiny town of Hope. And that's because of geography. There are massive mountain canyons and river valleys that squeeze all the highways through here. And at the height of the disaster, a few days back, all four of them were either smashed or covered in mud and rocks, or both. And so right now, as of tape time, we have intermittent traffic coming in from the number 7 from Vancouver into Hope, often called the Lougheed Highway. That's actually built on top of the old Dewdney Trunk Road for most of its length. And then going further in from Hope to the interior, places like, you know, Kamloops and Penticton, it's the number 3, again, with very tentative intermittent traffic, because there's just so much rain soaked into the mountainsides right now. They just give way and they slide. And so overnight, last night, there were more mudslides on the number 7, so much so that teachers in the local school district couldn't get to work. And so they were blocked, so they canceled school in the whole area, including Kent. Same thing when it comes to pharmacists. I was reading this morning that the local pharmacist had to be flown into work this morning because the highways are impassable.
And whereabouts exactly is that?
Yeah, he had to fly in, I believe he had to fly in from Chilliwack, where he lives, into Hope. So a lot of people, you know, if you live in Hope or live in Chilliwack, you barely mention it. Like, people don't consider it really a difference, even though it's a half an hour drive away. So many people bounce back and forth. And then, of course, there's places such as Harrison and Kent and Agassiz in between. People just consider it all really one area. So if you work or live in a different one of those towns, it's barely even worth mentioning at good times. But now it's really become quite evident how far people really need to travel, usually for housing reasons, in order to get to work or get to school. And so right now we're really noticing it.
And for our American listeners, just imagine if some of those giant multi-lane flyovers for your LA freeways knock one down for a mile or two. Those are the kind of gaps we're looking at. Entire rivers have been diverted, and now they've exposed pipelines.
Yep.
And so that pipeline that has to bring oil to be turned into gasoline in Vancouver, well, that's not running anything right now. So the Vancouver area is under gasoline rationing, 7.5 American gallons each, or 30 liters in Canadian measurement. So, and we're told this difficulty is going to last almost up till Christmas time, and that's barring any further major storms.
Knock wood, exactly.
Yeah.
And
now, are you happy with the kind of emergency response we've seen? I know locally, ranchers and farmers are the most independent folks you'll meet on the planet, and as soon as there's an emergency, you'll never see people team together better than farmers and ranchers.
Yeah, exactly, and rural folks who are used to helping on, with their pickup trucks and their shovels. Now, I want to preface this with, we understand that an emergency is an emergency. Things are going to get missed or dropped. Nobody is perfect. So this is not a personal criticism. But we have got to get better at our emergency responses. Far too often, especially in the real thick of this emergency, people were left without any information. And it was private citizens acting with courage and decisiveness who made all the difference. So in many cases, like you mentioned, the farmers, you can see pictures of them on sea-doos and in boats leading their cattle to somewhat higher ground or drier land. Here in the Fraser Valley between Chilliwack, Harrison, Agassiz, Hope, all those areas I mentioned, it was actually private helicopter pilots with their own private helicopters that were flying people back and forth. And I mean, getting a surgeon who was trapped in the Hope area flown back into Vancouver so they can continue their work. Or getting essential medicine brought down on a fishing boat from the Metro Vancouver area down the Fraser River, which, by the way, was angry and full of mud-slid trees, big snags. It was not a nice pleasure craft, bringing stuff down on their boats. And these are sturgeon watching fishing boats, that sort of thing. It was private citizens that really stepped into the crack there and helped. So once all this is done, they really need to take a hard look at their communications and how emergency responses roll out. Because apparently, unfortunately, when it comes to local government and provincial government, in many cases, one hand didn't know what the other was doing, and so they need to sort that out. And, again, we understand it hits the fan, everybody's scrambling, and you got to do what you got to do. Nothing's perfect, but
it seems to me. Now, I covered several emergency exercises when I was out reporting for News 1130 and other media outlets in Vancouver. But in the last 10 years, I can't remember any major emergency exercise pretending that the Fraser Valley is flooded or that Vancouver's been devastated by an earthquake or that a major forest fire has swept through Victoria. I haven't seen any exercises, maybe perhaps because we've been dealing with so many real emergencies. But again, there doesn't seem to be any coordination or a minister in charge of let's collect this information, let's have these phone numbers handy. They're just not doing it.
That's a great point, actually. Now that you mention it, I remember that distinctly, both as a journalism student in my younger days and then as a reporter in the Vancouver area and on Vancouver Island. You're right. At least once a year, you would usually get your local emergency response people going through a major exercise. And I mean major. They would hire actors, they would have wounds on their faces, they would have helicopters coming back and forth, emergency transports using trucks. And that's a good thing to do because it refreshes your skills and it exposes what you don't know. And what you don't know, you don't know. And you don't want to wait for a real emergency to realize that you have no way of getting in touch with, for example, the head of the Fraser Valley Regional District has no way of getting in touch with the safety minister in order to shut down roads or allocate funding or emergency supplies. We can't wait for the real emergency. They have to get better at communicating with each other, declaring a state of emergency, and making sure that they're able to talk to each other instantly. Because again, kudos to all of the men and women, the private citizens who really stepped up and put their shoulder into it, including in some cases it was local teachers that were opening their high schools in the middle of the night, doing a lot to help each other, and that was good to see. But once all this clears, and hopefully that's soon, they really need to figure out their emergency response plan.
We'll have more with Kris Sims right after this.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Kris Sims. Kris, BC is still discussing putting a tax on freedom of information. Why do they want to charge people to find out information that their taxes have already paid for?
Yeah, it's unacceptable. And they rammed it through late last week. So while we have, highways that are still collapsed, the Coquihalla, it's awful to see. That could take months to fix depending on how quickly they're able to do it. People are, they have other things to pay attention to put it mildly. And they pushed through this legislation in the legislature in Victoria late last week. And apparently it's going to cost now somewhere between $5 and $50 per Freedom of Information request. And so what a lot of us who use FOI are worried about is that means every document. How much is that going to be per document? So that could be an agenda or an email or, a receipt or a travel itinerary. Each one of those could be incurring a fee here.
And who decides how much they're going to charge?
It would be the government that decides it. It's just spitballing.
Well, so they're just going to make everyone. Yeah, well, knowing government, they'll just make every request $50 because we don't know how much it's really going to cost us to dig into this.
And see, this is where it's completely unacceptable. So we need to turn the table right now. Like, everybody needs to be all hands on deck. We don't care if you're right wing, left wing, or a flying purple monkey party. You need access to information, and it should be free. In fact, this information should be published on the internet without us asking for it in the first place. That's called proactive disclosure. That should, as a rule, as it is in most United States jurisdictions, it's a matter of course, you just post that stuff. You always do. We shouldn't even need to be asking for it, let alone paying to ask for it. And on top of all of that, they usually black out a lot of the pertinent information anyway. And we need to keep in mind how critically important freedom of information is. It's freedom of information requests that, for example, had Jessica Wallace, the great reporter for Kamloops This Week, uncovering that their former CAO of Thompson-Nicola Regional District had spent around $500,000 over 5 years on stuff like hotels and restaurants and jewelry for staff. That was through FOI. It was the Prince George Citizen, the newspaper, that put through FOI requests to find out that the construction of their downtown parking lot had ballooned from somewhere around $12 million to somewhere around $30 million. That's FOI. And we can't forget, of course, the former Speaker of the legislature, Darryl Plecas. He had to basically go undercover for a year and document all of this spending that was going on between the clerk and the sergeant at arms, everything from super fancy international trips to our $3,000 wood splitter. He had to go undercover and document all that stuff and then blow the whistle on it. And he called for more transparency at the legislature, not less. And the premier at the time said, "Oh, well, we got to get to the bottom of this. You're right. We need to be more accountable." This is the opposite of that. They can't be charging people for FOI.
Well, now has the government explained why it's doing this, and have the opposition members of the House said that they'll rescind this law or repeal it or whatever if they're elected?
I don't think that the opposition has articulated it that directly yet. I could be wrong. The opposition has opposed these fees being imposed. And from the government side of things, their excuse or their reasoning, depending on how you phrase it, is that it goes something like this. There's too many people asking for too many freedom of information pieces, and it's clogging up the system and taking up too much time. And they're partially blaming the opposition party. They're partially blaming, nosy journalists who dare file a whole bunch of FOIs.
Nosy journalists asking questions. How dare you?
Apparently, Bob Mackin, the great investigative journalist there with The Breaker, he files all sorts of FOIs, and apparently that's a pain in the butt. Well, too bad. That's our job, is to make sure that we get access to this information. And it was through FOI, I believe it was through FOI, that had Mackin discover that they were spending something like $1,500 a month on some Rockstar TV studio for the government to be using, even though we have plenty of already paid for broadcast centers for government to use all the time. No, they wanted the star treatment. So, we discover these sorts of spending scandals and wastes of money all the time. And now, going forward, when we start rebuilding the province, a lot of this infrastructure, you need to have good FOI access because you need to make sure that these contracts are on the up and up. You need to make sure that we're getting good value for money and that we've got a good person who's fixing it and that there aren't, favors being handed out. That's what that transparency is for. And it's for everyone's benefit. It's for the people's benefit and it's for the government's benefit. Because there are well-meaning people in government, both elected and not, who want to do the right thing for the province. And if they know that everything is on the up and up, they can trust their colleagues. They can trust the system better. We'll have more faith in the function of government that way. It's better for everyone to have free and open access to this information. So it's a real head-scratcher to see a government say, you know what, we're going to put up a barrier to information. That's the opposite direction. We can't be going there.
Governments wonder why the public is so skeptical about their pronouncements and actions, and perhaps also skeptical about why they're so silent about certain things. Well, now there'll be even more silence and more cover-ups.
Yes, exactly.
What are they covering up? What are they so scared that a journalist might find?
What are they hiding?
Yeah.
What are they hiding? And keep in mind also, as we both know, private newsrooms, are decimated. There's very few journalists and reporters left in them. And so now if you start sticking them with between 5 and 50 every single time they're asking for information, sometimes their budgets just won't cover that. And that's the big guys. That's not even touching, small independent organizations. Like here at the CTF, I think I probably file, just guesstimating, maybe 130 a year. Like, that's on the low end of things. That starts adding up. And we're supported by free will donations. Like, people are giving us their money in order to find this stuff out. Like, that's just not cool. They need to reverse this immediately. And what really stinks is that what was the urgency here? Why did they ram this through last week when everybody is so consumed with very pressing immediate problems? Like, that's got a lot of nerve.
Of course, they're ramming it through. Well, there's an extreme emergency in the province where every responsible reporter is out covering the flooding, the landslides, the mudslides, the cows and chickens that are being slaughtered, if not drowning outright. So, of course, that's the perfect time to pass an onerous law that's going to make this more of a dictatorship than a democracy.
And that's sad. It really is. Because no matter what party's in charge, if you pull something like this, that shows that you have a disrespect for our open system of government and for democracy and for the people that you're supposed to be representing, regardless of ideology. We don't care. But if you pull something like this, that's a slap in the face. They need to not do this. They need to reverse everything that they've done on this issue, apologize, and climb down, like right now, saying, you know what? This was the best intention. We meant in order to clear up the system, blah, 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 but we realize now it would be too onerous to impose fees, and this is going to be freely posted online henceforth, proactively.
And after disasters, the nursing home disasters with COVID, the forest fires, now the floods in BC and landslides, there's a lot of government mishandling of things that they obviously don't want you to know about. And maybe that's the reaction to this law.
This is the thing, is it isn't just nickels and dimes. It isn't just the fee schedules for things or the receipts. It's email chains. So if you can get a good email chain, you can sometimes read what influenced, say, a contract being given or a decision being made or a law being drafted. That's very important in order to be able to trace back where these ideas originated, find out who the players are, and then ask them the pertinent questions. Maybe they've got a very good reason for the decisions they made, and they can say that to the press. But that's the whole point. We need that tool to hold the powerful to account. And if they're putting up a paywall now around free information, it's no longer free. So they need to reverse this.
When he was in opposition, the now Premier John Horgan said he was against the Liberal government's proposal to charge for FOI. How come he's all in favor of it now?
Because he's in government now.
Oh,
it's amazing how that works.
Yes.
It's one of the oldest political tricks in the book. It's the same way of saying, a chicken in every pot, and somehow magically we'll pay for it, and it won't be the taxpayers who pay for it. There are government money trees, all sorts of silly things. Same thing that they ramp up government spending just before an election call, and there's nothing to see here, even though it's going off into their own ridings. All parties, unfortunately, seem to do this, and all governments seem to do this, but again, this is what causes cynicism. This is what erodes public trust. This is what keeps people home when they're supposed to be getting out there and voting and volunteering and going to their local city halls and being good citizens. It's pulling nonsense like this. Standing up while you're in opposition and saying we shouldn't be charging money for freedom of information, and then the moment you're in government and in power doing exactly that, it's not acceptable.
Also, while in opposition, John Horgan said he was against government ads that look a whole lot like propaganda. Well, he's now in government, and what happens? They change the forestry laws when it comes to old-growth logging, and we're seeing this ethnically correct family wander through BC's wilderness going, thank you, NDP, for saving this forest. Well, that is running during an emergency. I don't see any government ad saying if you've lost your home, lost your farm, are in hospital because of this, here are the phone numbers and websites to contact to get emergency aid or funding.
And people need that right now.
There are no ads saying that.
There are people's entire homes that have been swept down rivers.
The BC government is running television ads promoting BC government liquor stores at Christmas time. There are no ads on BC television telling you if you are suffering from the damage from the emergency that's still underway, here are the people to contact.
Yeah.
Here are the departments to contact. Instead, we're being told, buy government booze and go wander through a forest somewhere.
If you go to people's, in different towns, like local bulletin boards, like on social media, so Facebook groups or something, it is full of people saying, my son hasn't been able to drive into work for the past 2 weeks because the road is blocked. Is there any way to repair for lost wages? My home was swept away. I can't get to work, and I missed a very critical dentist appointment. I'm in extreme pain. Is there any way to get help? And they don't know where to turn or who to call. And in these sort of situations, this is supposed to be the basics that government is responsible for, and it's been found wanting, unfortunately.
Of course, they'll say, well, we're relying on media outlets to get that out. You can't assume that media outlet, if it's local, is up and running. It may be underwater, literally.
It could literally be, and again, they may not have the staff. And frankly, if you've been adding to your comms staff and bloating it, and every time you have a budget lockup, you can see that. So what used to be a huge room with one side of it full of journalists and the other side of it full of comms people and strategists, it's the comms people and the strategist side that is growing exponentially. And it's the news media side that is diminishing all the time. And so they just might not have the hands on deck. And so again, they have got to do a better job of this. They need to do a review once all this is over and figure out a way to be much more efficient in their emergency response.
Vancouver's response to journalists' questions is to hire more PR specialists at City Hall. I've been trying to get a hold of how many mayors now? Gregor Robertson went 7 years without answering any of my requests for an interview because his people always said he was too busy. I calculated 15 million hours or something passed, and in the millions of hours, he couldn't have found the time for 10 minutes to talk to me. I just wanted to talk to him about the declining downtown. Well, now downtown Vancouver on the Lower East Side, there's 3,000 or 4,000 people living on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
And I didn't see any politician during the federal or provincial elections take a stroll through there saying, we could clean this up or help you folks. They've just given up. It's pretty obvious they've just given up on those people.
It's really sad to see. And it's one of the reasons why we want to have a municipal auditor general, a dedicated office with staff and experts of a municipal auditor general. Because the story is, the narrative is, that millions of dollars are being poured into that geographic region of the downtown east side. And most people, if you go down there and see what's going on, would say that human misery abounds. It's tragic and sad and wrong. And most people, just as a layman, would say, you know what, it's not improving. So if it is true that millions of dollars in aid are flowing into that region, then we need to know why it's not improving the situation. It could be that it's simply being misallocated. Maybe their staff are in the wrong spots. We don't know, which is why, again, it's the same thing as the FOI tool. We need the tools of accountability and transparency for people's own good. So we know that, yes, taxpayers' money is going into that, but darn it, it is being spent well. It's going to people who need it, and it's going to improve people's lives. And this is where I put it back onto the citizen. During elections, whether it's municipal, provincial, or federal, it's up to us to pay attention, and it's up to us to tell reporters what you want to hear about, okay? So if you truly care about what is happening, for example, on the downtown east side, or what is happening to the infrastructure in Abbotsford that keeps the Sumas Plain a Sumas Plain and not a Sumas Lake, then you must call all your newsrooms, call your local elected representatives, and tell them this is what you want to hear more about. Because if we don't, they'll just pick up what the shiny object is coming out of Ottawa or Victoria and run with that for the day. And it rinses out the news cycle. So that's really important. During the next elections, it's important for all of us to pay attention to these issues we're talking about right now.
Now, an example I give about why Vancouver's downtown east side is the poorest neighborhood in Canada, probably in North America. I would say in the U.S. and Canada. Maybe Mexico's got some places that are worse. But they're going, well, I said, for example, there's $1 million grant to start a non-governmental organization to do this. Well, they have a CEO. They get $180,000. They'll have 2 assistants that make $120 each.
Right.
And they hire clerks that make $90,000 to $100,000. By the time they're finished with that, there's maybe $100,000 out of that $1 million that'll go on the street. Well, divided by 3,000 or 4,000 homeless people, that, $100,000 doesn't go very far.
And what you just described there is exactly why we need an auditor. We do. We need an auditor and a whistleblower ombudsperson. Where if that is true, if that's the case, there's a place to call, and there's people who can actually do a deep dive investigation and look at the books. Because if that is the case, that's not acceptable. But again, we're operating in the dark. We don't know. Every single one of those organizations could be completely on the up and up. But we wouldn't know it. We wouldn't know it because we don't have the tools to find out. So for everybody's benefit, both taxpayers and the folks who are suffering down there, and the folks who just live down there and want to see the area prosper and thrive instead of being a depressing, scary, dangerous place, we all need to make sure that we have these tools because it benefits everybody.
Also, I want to know about BC Housing's high eviction rate. They like to talk about how many more people they have housed over a year, but I never hear them talk about how many people they've evicted so that they can go and bring in new tenants.
Oh, good question.
Because I know of a certain high-rise social housing project where evictions tumble like water coming down the Fraser River.
Wow. See, this is again why we would need more investigative tools. And so perhaps that's something that the provincial auditor could manage and take a look at. Or, frankly, there's plenty of people who work within the Ministry of Housing. So there's the elected political staff that manage the minister's day-to-day, but there's an entire wing of bureaucrats who work within the Ministry of Housing. They should be able to be called to committee, which we already pay for, of MLAs, who are literally people who write laws in Victoria, elected politicians, and they should answer these questions. That's what these functions are for. The legislature isn't for grandstanding and making neat speeches in. Functionally, the legislature is to write new laws and fix old ones that aren't working. And the committee system is a fantastic system because that means you can pull people in either remotely if they don't want to travel or directly if they can. It's all translated, it's all documented, it's all written down, it's webcast, it's audio archived, and they answer questions. Like this, if you want to find that stuff out, that should take about a week to find that stuff out.
It's one of the problems in BC is we don't have an effective opposition because the BC Liberal Party, which should be correctly labeled as so-cred light,
Yep.
Or conservative, let's be blunt, they don't have a leader.
Yes.
And of course, they're busy bickering internally and not really keeping an eye on what's happening to the province and questioning the government about it.
Yes. And that happens frequently. Anytime, it doesn't matter what level, if it's provincial or federal. If you wind up with an opposition that is in disarray, that is fractured, if they're finding a new leader, it's really difficult to keep that ship going down the lane in a straight way. You need to have a person of strong character who's well respected within the party to have their hand on the rudder. And a lot of times what is really, non-flashy work. It doesn't catch headlines, people aren't excited about it. A lot of this day-to-day work doesn't get done, or it doesn't get the recognition and scrutiny it needs in order to further it along. So quite often in these cases, you'll have a well-meaning staffer or a good MLA who really cares about something and they're pushing it along, but there's no fuel. There's no oomph. There's no emphasis because the media is not paying attention to it and the other members of their party and their opposition group aren't paying attention to it. And so it's difficult to hack and slash your way through the brambles by yourself. So hopefully things will improve once that party figures out who their next leader is.
And we'd like to see, I know they say they're against this tax on freedom of information, but again, it would be nice to hear a message saying if we're elected, we'll rip up that law.
Yes, exactly. And sign pledges. That's one of the reasons why the Canadian Taxpayers Federation gets people to sign pledges. Because it's not a locked guarantee, but at least people can believe it a little bit more if you're writing your name down on it. And so, we would like to see a nice, clear agenda from all of the candidates for whatever the party is going to be named, and have them commit to things like that, such as we will rip up this FOI law so it doesn't cost you any money. We will instill a municipal auditor general with teeth and a team of watchdogs to keep an eye on things so whistleblowers have a place to call. We will, open ICBC to competition. We will cancel the BC carbon tax and fight Trudeau's federal one, all sorts of stuff. We're really hoping to see some substantive policy plans coming out of this leadership contest.
Kris, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you for caring, and everybody just be safe out there. I know it's pretty dicey, especially in southern BC. Just hang in there.
My guest has been Kris Sims, BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Her website, taxpayer.com. Is there a way for people to get a hold of you if they have any concerns about the things we've talked about or things they would like us to talk about?
Oh, I would love that. Again, to repeat the website, you can contact us through there and you can read all of our petitions, you can sign them, you can read our columns. It's taxpayer.com. You can also email me directly. It's ksims, KSIMS @taxpayer.com. I'd love to hear from you.
Or if you'd like us to ask those questions, you can send them to info@howstreet.com, our YouTube channel, Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter @TalkDigitalNet. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.